I guess. Okay, wow, amazing. So I hope you guys had a good break from um after the first wave. It felt like the longest month for me. I don't know how it was for you. But yeah, it felt like so much. And yeah, let's do a quick check-in just for everyone to warm up the space. Let's see how you guys are feeling at the moment. You could just say hi as well. Yeah, what's your thought? What's your emotion, your sense?
I can start if that's okay. Hi, good morning or evening. I don't know where everybody is. I'm Val Alino, and I'm just feeling super grateful for this moment. Very excited to continue our pathway to understanding more this beautiful energy. And yeah, I feel like so much love and expansion is just bursting out of my heart. That's exactly how I'm feeling. Thank you.
Yay, thank you. You're back in Mexico, right?
No, last day in Bali.
Oh, you're still in Bali. Okay. You're
And tonight I'm flying to Manila to finish two more endeavors over there, and then back to Mexico on the 13th.
okay. All right. Anyone else would like to sound out?
Well, hello. I am Mariana. I live in Mérida in Mexico, and I am new. I just joined the group about a month ago, so I'm catching up, and I am very excited to be here. Looking forward for everything I'm gonna learn and experience, and well, just happy that I don't know, life and the circumstances just brought me here. So thank you.
Amazing. Val's from Mexico as well, by the way.
Hello, Val.
And I have a place in Merida. We have to talk, okay? I actually have a place in Chicxulub. Anyway, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? I don't know if yeah, yes, perfect. Hi, my name is Viri. Val, I love your fireworks, Val. My name is Viri. I'm from Mexico as well, but I live in Bali. And I'm so excited to be here. You guys don't have any idea how excited I am. I was in Maya for 10 days on April, and they told me about this 1 year course, and I, of course, joined it because I want to go deeper in my knowledge. You know, I feel like a big responsibility when sharing this, like energy and who we are actually. So I'm so excited to be here. I'm catching up with all the first 3 months, and my mind is already woo! Well, so I don't know how I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna do it. So thank you. Thank you. I look forward for
Uh,
being in these calls.
Amazing. Thank you very good to see you here again, Cassis and the gang. Okay, why don't we jump into the call where the conversation could serve as check-ins. There's now quite a few of us. Um, we're about to enter into an amazingly complex and beautiful um, inner dance ground. There's so much ground to cover, and I'm glad we are investing a lot of time. So thank you for being here. You are invited to join the two calls that are on top of each other. There's another one tomorrow. That one is better for Europeans. You're free to watch that as well. Some of the material will be repeated, but often there are unique things that come up in either calls, considering the European, Asiatic, and um, Americas and Australia elements. They're all representing different dimensions. So yeah, I hope you had received the PDF. This will help to map out quite many things. Let me look for that. Documents. This one. Oh no, that's the so yeah, no, never mind that. Just oh sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. So let's watch it a little bit just so we have some sense of what is to come. All right. So this is a very, very general map of everything, everything that we might cover that is science-based that will help the spiritual elements come into play. So the general outline would begin here with these four. The endocrine system would probably take up quite a lot more in the third wave, but I'm interested to place some focus on three very major systems that already would take a lot of time to cover. And we'll slowly approach them. We'll take our time, especially maybe with music. Let's cover that in the following month, maybe. So the issue here is when we tap into the inner dance, we're affecting like everything. It's not just a lot. We're affecting everything. Everything is undergoing a change within that experience. So to try to understand or to explain it in simple sentences, it might work, but there's something in us that's not simple. We are amazingly complex and we're amazingly wise. So the exercise we're doing is to begin to put more consciousness and words and formulations to what we normally only feel. So especially for those who would conduct trainings or would facilitate this as a form of therapy, it really would be interesting to create the bridge work that allows energy to be understood from mental, emotional, and physical components. And most importantly, how do we relate those three together? So I'm really thankful that you're here, that we can study this together. Providing a good map is incredibly important so that we don't get lost, right? You can easily get lost because once you take up a specific topic, that's like a rabbit hole, and then that's going to move into other topics. So what we need is a kind of meta map so that no matter what question comes up, you don't get lost. You can see the interrelations between different zones, different aspects. I think a gentle way to start the day would be to invite two people who had some interesting questions and experiences. Actually, it's three. Two of them were in the same room when it happened. So I'd start with Jeremy and then I move to Trudy Fiona, who had something interesting. They're all from Singapore. And I feel their questions opens up relationalities already where the autonomic nervous system, the limbic system, and the neocortex could come in. Jeremy, let's start with you. Could you formulate your question? And I love these questions because they're coming from an inner dance experience.
Okay. Hi guys. So over the last few weeks I facilitated a session, and during the session, so the guy was lying down and he started throwing punches in the air and he was shouting. So after the session we started talking about it, and he shared about him being pulled back into a memory when he was about 5 or 6 years old, and he saw himself who was in the hospital bed. He was fighting off some of the nurses because he was really, really scared. So at the end of the session, he was telling me something like, "Oh, I think I need another session because I feel like there's a lot more to scream and to shout and to punch out inside of my body." And I thought it was pretty interesting because in my head, I was thinking, oh, isn't it the point of inner dance to surface these stories, these unconscious triggers, and to realize that, hey, I'm no longer that 5-year-old, that 6-year-old that was scared anymore, right? Like, and my question that I'm actually thinking about is how how much of it is how easy is it for us to actually, go into the whole loop or go into inner dance because we are so used to the response of like shouting and screaming, and we think that it's releasing versus actually integrating and changing the relationship with our fear, which actually happens outside of the inner dance as well. So yeah, that's the question.
Okay, so your question almost has two prongs. By the way, could you state what he was afraid of? State the fear.
He was afraid of being needled because there was an IV drip. So it was just like a fear of like, oh, what's going to happen? So that was what he was afraid of.
Okay, so
Like,
it's the fear of needles. All right, so it's two-pronged whereby the question relates to do we work on the emotion by allowing it to surface because this man wants to like keep going maybe to the same thing so that it could be looked at. But there was something in your question when you wrote to me that looked at the other possibility that are we actually creating the loop, or is there a way that we don't need to keep going back to that same emotion? Okay, so let's maybe note those. Let me do that on the iPad. Let's make an outline here because you already bringing up some concepts that would be important. Okay, I have no idea where this came from. Don't need it anymore. I guess fear and memory would be the case in point, and then you mentioned the word loop. All right, so that's it for Jeremy. We're not going to answer that now because it takes it takes maybe a year to even answer a question like that. We can't approach it without understanding what is fear, what is memory, and within fear, what would be important would be to study what is fear conditioning and fear extinction. Either how is fear programmed and how are we able to deprogram fear. I won't tell you what to do. I'm here to maybe open up conversations in the long term so that you will know exactly what to do with your own understanding of how fear actually works. Let's move to Fiona introducing Trudy, rather than asking Trudy to. Fiona, are you there? Maybe, yeah.
Sorry. Okay, this is Trudy.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to relate something that happened to me last week. I think I'm still trying to sort of like understand and make sense of it. So okay, we had a group of sound practitioners, and we were just getting together. Then we decided to basically do a sound bath where everybody would just take turns to be on the receiving end. And when it was like my turn, so okay, we did a couple of sessions, and then mine was the last session, right? And just before my session, we had sort of like a break, okay? Some discussions, and then went back into a sound bath. So I went into I don't know what kind of a space I went into because it was totally blank. It felt like I was knocked out and like there was no time. So when I came back again, I don't really know how long it passed. It felt like it was an instant. So it was just like, nothing, right? And then I was conscious and I was like, oh, okay, is it the end? But the music was still, like the gongs were still going and I could feel the people around. So then I started to move. It was no intention to go into inner dance, but it just came out, right? So then I started to move my hand, it was swaying, and my feet were swaying. And I got into this very frenzied not so much a space, but I was very frenzied. So there was a lot of withering, movement, shaking, and I felt like choking, coughing, like somebody was, like trying to kill me. But it was interesting because all these things were happening, and it felt like I was looking at myself. So I was actually literally thinking, now where did this come from? It's like, is this my birth? Is this a trauma that I went through, something, like a past life? And I wasn't really, so I just let it be, right? And it just kept going on. And all this while I felt like there was a bit of a distance with what was happening, right? So like, I don't know where I was, okay? And then one of the facilitators, she started to help me because I was really choking, coughing, and moving so much, right? She laid her hands on me and then she started to hold me. And at some point, I heard someone say, "Oh, do you have Palo Santo? Or maybe sage is better." And I'm going, okay, what's going on, right? Because I was still whistling. And then they did what they did. They went to go and get Palo Santo sage. So they obviously thought something was happening. And then I heard her say something like, I've seen her in the dance, it's not her, right? And I was like, huh? I was still fine. There was no fear, nothing, right? And then they started to use tuning forks to clear the space, chant, and chant mantras. Now, the moment they started chanting mantras, there was this really loud, like angry sort of sound that came out, right? And then I was thinking, oh, that's not me. What's happening is really not me, And the sound just kept going and going and going and going. So I think everybody in the room was very concerned. They didn't panic. They were sort of holding the space for me. I think at some point thought that I had, and I actually also then like, oh, is there a spirit in me? Is there something in me that's, is that something happening? And the more they chanted, the more I reacted. So then they stopped. And I stopped, right? And then I was like, well, if there's something inside me, there's no separation because I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anything at all, actually. I was just sort of like observing. Anyway, finally, Fiona came. Fiona came, and she came in and then she started to speak to, and she said, okay, she started to speak to the spirit, right? And she's like, it's okay, we're not here to do anything. And she then guided that session. And I was sort of like reacting in a way where when she spoke to me, the sounds were still coming out. They were angry sounds, right? It was very strange because they told me I was hissing at people. And so she started to speak to the spirit, like, what do you want, and all. Oh, so backtrack. At some point I thought, okay, if there's somebody inside me, can I break out of this, right? So I did. I was trying to say, get out of my body, get out of my body. And the more I said get out of my body, the more the sounds came up, but there was no words. And then I decided, oh, okay, maybe I should chant. So I started chanting my own mantra. And when I started chanting a mantra, I could hear my voice. And when my voice came through, I could then speak. So it was in my home. So I actually took the opportunity. I told my son, I said, get the dogs out of the house, get the dogs out of the house. So they did what they needed to. Anyway, so back to Fiona. She guided me through. So Fiona, if you're here, if there's anything you want to add, please add on to this. So she guided me through this. She spoke to the spirit. She had a sense of where the spirit, I think, was revealing some things to her. And in our own way together, we sort of like brought the spirit to light and had the spirit move on to the light. And then eventually I came back to consciousness. I was very, very was very dazed. So there was so much happening. The next day I was really tired. I had no energy, no nothing at all. I just basically just lay on my bed. Yeah. So I had this this experience, and because it was through inner dance, I thought it was through inner dance. I was actually wondering whether in the dance of like, when we do this, right, we actually get into a space where, or into, realms where we maybe connect with things or so. I know it sounds a little bit woo, but it sort of like made me wonder this. And I also had a discussion with Fiona, I think because she shared this with you and you had a response. I think you truly had a response as well. I'm not close to this, but about belief systems and how belief systems sort of like influence us, which I get, right? I think I'm still trying to make sense out of it.
Okay, well, thank you for your openness to share about this. This is super interesting and vulnerable. It also would trigger anxiety in certain minds. It's like, okay, what if that happens to me, or if I'm holding this space, what would I do? It's a very, very interesting situation. And in my experience, I've seen this a lot. And to be honest, probably when I say a lot, most of them were in Singapore. So this needs to be understood because there's a tendency in the culture. There are very old religions there, and there's also quite a lot of westernization and thinking process, so that when thinking drops, the emotional and the spiritual and the body itself, the body is an intelligent mechanism, which is the word is repressed. There's a lot of repression, and when there's an allowance for that to be freely expressed, it will take that opportunity. And I think because this was in your house, there was probably a feeling of safety where you didn't have to ride the MRT, or you could just stay there. Fiona, do you want to add anything to this? And then we'll go into the topics through this doorway. Think
Yeah.
you're having breakfast.
Noel was there as well. Yeah, so we were there in her place having the sound bath. And because a few of us are like inner dancers, so it's just natural that we go into process during the sound bath. So we were in the first half, we went back home. We came home because he had a class. And at the end of the class, Winnie was calling me like urgently. She's freaking out, and it's just like, Fiona, Trudy is possessed. You need to come like now. Like, oh, possessed? Yeah, definitely she's possessed. I'm like, okay, darling, let's go to her place. Trudy is possessed. And then, and then, and then in the lift, we're like, I asked him, like, do you really think it's a possession, or it's an emotion, or she's going through a deep process? And then he's like, she's possessed. I'm like, okay, she's possessed then. So I was like, the whole time in the taxi, I was like, is she possessed? I was really feeling into it and questioning. And then I'm like, what if she is? Let's just say she is. Okay. Then I started calling spirit guides and all of that, because I also practice mediumship. So I was like, okay, let's do this whole sequence, yeah? And then protecting ourselves, the taxi driver is like thinking why Noel is chanting some Buddhist mantra and all of that. So we went with the expectation that Trudy is possessed. And when I arrived, I started preparing like my sage, my dragon blood, my copal, burning all the incense with charcoal and all of that. So as I was doing that, I was calming Trudy down, because she was growling, she was hissing, she was facing down and just doing like weird shit that I don't think Trudy will ever do it, because she's such a calm, gentle, motherly, she's just so gentle.
and she's not herself. Basically, she's somebody else. Like the moment I stepped in, I was like, oh, that's not her. That's freaky. Okay. But you know what? I need to be the space holder now, so I need to have my confidence. Okay. And then at some point she started hissing me when I was trying to like have a conversation. And then I was like, oh, that's scary. Let me talk to my spirit guide and ask for some confidence and strength. And then I managed to like negotiate, have a chat, and send the spirit to light. And we were seeing things. I was seeing things. I generally see a lot of things. My visuals are very how would I say, very creative. I have a very creative visual. Um, and I dream a lot. I lucid dream a lot. And if I go into my inner dance, or if I do Akashic records or any form of creative stuff, I will see a lot of pictures, image, colors, people, and any sort of things. So yeah, I was seeing things, she was seeing things, and when she was about to come out, I don't know if I think she's coming out or I felt she's coming out. At this point, I'm a little bit confused because I'm comparing science versus spirit. I said, Trudy, if you are out of it, then open your eyes when you're out of it. Then we were like, okay, send the spirit out, send the spirit out. And at some point, she managed to open her eyes. And at this point, it was maybe 45 minutes into her journey, her process. Then this is something I didn't mention in the voice recording to Pi. She wanted to vomit. And there was a point in my life, I think it was like maybe 5-6 years ago. It was my first mediumship session and I was semi-possessed. And I wanted to vomit when the spirit left as well. And when I looked at her, I saw her wanting to vomit. And at that point, I was like, oh, this is definitely a possession. Because this reminded me of my own experience. And I'm like, okay, then maybe I'm supposed to be there to hold that space for her because I have experienced it myself. But then after asking Pi and Ituli question, I feel like my mind got fucked. I don't know what to think anymore. I'm like, how can I put spirit and science together at the same time? And I was having a deep conversation with Trudy, and then at the same time, now I'm having existential crises. I'm like is everything needed? And I'm processing all this. This is so confusing. I'm getting lost with this topic, and I'm thinking about it every day, actually. So I'm glad that we're talking about it now and process. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're ready. Let's open up a whole bunch of questions and try to map these out. These are questions that will be asked over and over again in many colors, shapes, sizes when you conduct the work. So I think an important question asked here is not just what is happening, the question is where is it happening? Now, in Singapore, for those who don't know the land, there are a lot of belief structures, both Western and Eastern, Southern and Northern. So if you go to places like those, like Bali, for example, there are very deep belief structures. And what I noticed is those belief structures have a spirit. And if you create an opening within that, that spirit will speak back for sure. What's confusing about Singapore is you have the Malay, Chinese, Indian, all mixed in, along with a lot the New Age and the Western and even Christianity. So with the fact that Singaporeans that do inner dance are mostly from the Chinese community, paradigmatically, the Chinese really believe in possession. It's innate in your culture. Entities, nature spirits, it's not alien to you. So always dragons, the phoenix, archetypes are important. They're embedded in your even your DNA structure kind of holds it. So it's not really, we can think of it from imagination thought, but it might be in your bodies as well. And because I've done so much work there, I don't judge, I just watch it and I'm interested. So I will look at it still from a science spirit perspective. When this happens to me though, I cannot approach it the way this was held automatically. I cannot, because that could get me in trouble and that could get the room in trouble. I've done inner dances in churches and convents, and automatically when something intense happens, it's straight away, it's a possession. It's the demon, the devil. So okay. It's really important that based on inner dance, the greatest safety net is that people need to take ownership. I don't do any form of cleansing because my mindset meets something that I know is already inside Fiona. Definitely Trudy, you had it in you. It's like everything is one, nothing is separate. The idea of cleansing the room means, okay, there's bad spirits here. We need the actual act of having to cleanse something puts it there. And I really enjoyed listening to Trudy, who was merely mirroring everything that was happening in the room so that her body was expressing it from a non-thinking, non-linguistic, non-linear intelligence level, which is so awesome and so deep. I think if we learn to work with those, there would be amazing things to heal really deeply. So I would definitely interrelate Jeremy's question with what happened to Trudy. There is a kind of loop. That space that 2D entered into is the space where no time does exist. So spiritually, you could explain it through time perception. There is dimensionality there. But because the brain is what also grounds us in time structurally, um, the brain could be altered, and the brain could also allow for spiritual experiences, which could be the brain of a baby, the brain of someone on psychedelics, or the brain of an animal. And we should be studying these more or less in the next months for sure. So there's enough science here because of the fact that there's clearly a methodology that was conducted to do with vibration, context setting. Proprioception is the body position, as well as the many healing processes that took place prior to last weekend. Like all of those were preparatory for Trudy to enter this space, which for her probably could lead to deep transformation. If we could maybe talk to the spirit as something inside her that wanted to express amazingly. But for Trudy, as well as a therapist, for her to understand how she might apply this if it shows up, Fiona as well, and all of us included. When this shows up, like, how do we deal with this? What are the different ways to access deep change? Like, how do you talk to it? And there are so many options, actually. The options would be situational, so it would be hard for me to tell exactly what I might do, but I do have many options. Okay, so I really wanted to use this as an entry point to the topic. So let's go to the outline today. Set this aside. All right. So normally when we talk about inner dance, generally, no, never mind that. People like to feel this is what we're tapping into, like energy, God, the universe. But because we are conducting a methodology, we are affecting not just energy, we're affecting many things. Partly, let's say, the mind is being altered, emotions as well. is undergoing change, and the body is also going through alterations. There is energy in the mind, emotions, and the body. So what we would propose is maybe an outline on how we can understand each and every one of these separately, and how they are intrinsically linked to each other. Change the mind, you change emotions. Change the body, you change the mind. Change emotions, body conditions would shift. So there is no separation as to how these three are interlinked. We can study them one at a time. Inner dance is more interested in studying them all together. And it's in the interface. The actual wisdom wouldn't just be coming from 1, 2, and 3. It's actually these middle spaces where the science and spirit insight would emerge. Okay, so we're interested in this. It's an interesting topic. There are multiple deep thinkers who had wondered what would a spirituality or a science be that marries these three. Okay, and inner dance, I feel, is a very powerful system that looks at these. I think it bears noting that okay, music, proprioception, tactician. What else is there? Context. What else is there? Let me see. Yeah, there are many tools. Words could also just be meanings that are put there, and then the images that are embedded that do appear either automatically in a dream space or whatnot. They influence the being, whether it be a human being, like a dog being. What we do, the conditions that we set create alterations between these. So as we study these, we would study, okay, what's happening here. As we use these tools, right? These are the tools, and there are outcomes in our dimensionalities that come from how we're doing these things. Okay. Now, okay, this could look like psychology, self-help, systems, and physiology. How do we open up something more interrelatable to inner dance? So you're not just studying these in general. What about these that's inner dance based? Okay, so with that, we would open up the outlines, and the outlines are many. Okay, let's start maybe with the red. This is maybe the time when you would be more interested in the wiki systems within Life 1A with all the colors, whether it be here, here, and here. Right now, we would look a lot at the red, and a lot of the notes are here. We would add notes to these. You have access to these. So let's say you're facilitating, you're learning, or you are doing trainings. You can use this as a kind of thinking board. This would be important. We need to take a long time to go into these. I'm happy to maybe enter the limbic maps today, which is particularly important when it comes to the processing of emotions. The cortical maps would be more related to the higher cognitive functions. So when we talk about the mind, the maps would be here. Talk about emotions, the maps would be here. Now, talk about the body, most relatable to inner dance, we would need to look at the autonomic nervous system. Okay. All right, let's restart after just getting a sense of all of it. So we're looking at a particular brain model called the triune brain. It's a model, it's a hypothesis by a man named Paul MacLean.
Bye. You are not
I
sharing now.
disagree.
Okay, thank you. Sometimes this is just not working. Okay. All right. So the triune brain is a very interesting hypothesis. It's not always popular because Paul MacLean had issued out the triune brain as a theory of evolution. Mainly the fact that there was an old brain, brain, which he connoted to be the basal ganglia, and that after this, then we had developed the semi-old brain. Let's say semi-old new brain, and this is called the limbic system, and this is what processes emotions, also rewards, punishment, motivation, a lot to do with behavior. And then the new brain would be the neocortex, which would be, the gray, some of the white matter, but definitely the gray area covering the brain, the cortical regions. Okay. Already the story of Trudy is interesting because the basal ganglia is something MacLean wanted to call the reptilian brain. And it's already quite interesting that Trudy was acting like when you say hissing, it's like it's reptilian already. It's like snake-like or lizard-like, super out of character. So I think she's the perfect example to bring up. And I've seen that over and over again, like the unlikeliest people, like top-level businessmen, grandmothers, they literally would just scream and roll around the floor and crawl around like some primordial being, making weird sounds. So in this way, the reptilian brain system seems very much speaking out, demonstrating that I'm here. You forgot all about me. I am a reptile. I'm not just like a banker or a teacher. I have this other persona. It's quite hidden. Okay, so this is say this is emotions. The neocortex is just call it intelligence. It could also be called higher cognitive thinking processes. So I think already this is quite interesting that that there could be these three aspects. Now, I think there has been improvement on the triune brain theory, and this is through work that succeeds MacLean. And maybe a better way to understand it is rather than appointing the basal ganglia to be the old brain, which is already quite confusing because the basal ganglia is actually part of the limbic system. So why would you separate the basal ganglia from the limbic structures? I'm reading some important work by Robert Sapolsky, a very, very important neuroscientist. And in his formulations, it's the autonomic nervous system itself that could comprise of the reptilian brain system or just the old brain structure. That this is where we started. The whole body was the brain. Before then, we started to centralize that the brain is more the cortical regions. So in this, I am more confident to approach this model in the long term. So we could study these together, helping to outline, okay, why did that happen to Trudy, and what was happening in Jeremy's friend. Okay, now inner dance can formulate already through this structurally. Okay, let's take out MacLean because we're not exactly using his model strictly. We're still using a triune model, but we're not strictly following his line of thought. So hide this one here and this one as well. Create more space. All right, so let's first define inner dance. Inner dance as to why is it happening? And let's be very concrete. Today in the second wave introduction, this is the first time we're going to really go into concrete understandings of inner dance. We've been metaphorical, philosophical, theoretical in the first wave, but in this wave, we're really gonna have to concretize the work. All right, so inner dance happens through circuitry and chemistry, and possibly one of the most important portals is to understand the dopaminergic function. Like inner dance has a powerful effect on the dopamine pathways, dopamine activation or dopamine pathways. You remember those tools that we use, whether it be music, touch, words, body position, incense, smoke, Palo Santo, that can actually be quite powerful. That would activate her. So when the people lit up Palo Santo, if there was some understanding of the limbic system, going back to the limbic system, one of the important parts of the limbic system is the olfactory bulb. So if you want to light up emotions and energy, smell smell would totally activate it. It wouldn't decrease the effect, it would increase the effect. The sense of smell is very, very near the sense of emotion and memory and fear and excitement, arousal, and so on and so forth. So dopamine could light up if you bring about the sense of smell. Now, okay, for those who have attended past trainings in Maya or in Singapore or online, we're going to go back to some familiar territory, but we're going to make this a lot more clear today. Now that we're putting in more time and we're not shortcutting or bypassing the material. Inner dance lights up the dopamine pathways, increasing dopamine production and increasing dopamine reception. Okay, you can produce dopamine, but if you're not sending that into the necessary receptors, then nothing much will be changing. Okay, so what are the dopamine pathways? For one, let's maybe study before going into the pathway thing, let's look at the areas where dopamine goes to. Okay, so dopamine has these outputs that would receive the neurotransmitter. Let's say the first output to study would be the frontal cortex. And there are different parts of the frontal cortex. We would study the dorsolateral, and we would study the ventromedial. Okay, you will have to get used to these terms because they're powerful terms and they have different functions. Already with these two, depending on the techniques that you hold, the words that you say, music that you use, sending projections to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex would bring about more a sense of control, attention, focus. But if you want to modulate or increase emotions, you would go to this part of the frontal cortex, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. If it's too complicated for you to write down later on, so this is how you would write it: the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex or the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Okay, the other outputs of dopamine would be the amygdala. And the amygdala is responsible for emotions, especially fear and anxiety and aggression. um, the dopamine also goes to the nucleus accumbens. And that's the part of your body that's responsible for motor control or motor programs. Fourth one would be the hippocampus. And that's the part of your brain that is responsible mostly for memories. Okay, so those would be four. And then lastly, there would also be projections to the there should be two more. Let's talk about the striatum, which is actually the basal ganglia, one of the most important basal ganglia structures. And as you well know, that is responsible for reptilian brain functions, very autonomic functions. I think let's add another receptor site, and that's just the hypothalamus. It's actually more of a production site, and then that releases something quite important that inhibits hormone that we need to bring up that's associated with kind of like semi-psychotic, semi-channeling, not here anymore, you're not the same person, episodes that Trudy engaged herself in through her own ability to go there. Okay, so dopamine allows for all these. Like this, as you probably know, is responsible for attention, like being present. Yeah, and hypothalamus is just like autonomic functions. Could be sleep wake, it could be breathing, it could be heart rate, metabolism, immunity, and so on and so forth. Okay, so back to inner dance. What does inner dance do? Inner dance helps in the routing or the unrouting of dopamine. Okay, so let's look at a more maybe organized mapping of this by maybe looking at the actual different pathways for dopamine. Okay, I need more space for now. What are the dopamine pathways? Okay, just to show you later on where you do want to study this more. The wiki site is here. The dopamine pathway wiki entry is in the red, but I think I would rather draw it out slowly. It's easier to understand. Let me know if you can't see the screen. So the first pathway would be the number one, the mesocortical dopamine pathway. So the key word here is cortical. Okay, so this is dopamine activating more of the going back here, right? You could either talk to the mind or emotions or the body. Yeah. So if you wish to talk to the mind, you need to reach the cortical structures, and dopamine has a role in allowing that to happen. And that's done through the mesocortical dopamine pathway system. And basically, that's dopamine speaking especially to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So if you want people to, like not have ADD, ADHD, to plan things out very well. This needs to be quite healthy. And if this is not healthy, then strange things would happen. Let's say when you decrease the amount of dopamine going to the cortex or the cortical regions, that's when things start to get inner dancey. So techniques in music, touch, proprioception, a lot of those are already designed to actually reroute dopamine that normally goes into the thinking brain. Okay, so right, like when you ask people to lay down, close the eyes, you're already decreasing the amount of dopamine that's being sent to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex so that people aren't as attentive or as present anymore. You use sound especially, that would do that rerouting. So the second pathway would be called the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. And this is a little bit more complex. It would be, okay, I would just rewrite them. There are inputs that are, outputs from what sends out dopamine, which is, I'll list that out later, that heads to the amygdala. So anytime you use emotive music or when you hold people and you unleash emotions, you're basically sending out dopamine, and that's being received in the amygdala through the mesolimbic pathway. The hippocampus would also be a target for the that uses the mesolimbic pathway, and so does the nucleus accumbens enjoy this region. Or the circuit, let's call it a circuit. So memory and motor programs, aka like body movements. So, okay, this is quite confusing because inner dance, do we reroute dopamine from there, or are we actually increasing, considering there's maybe a heightening of emotional levels? And then according to Jeremy's example, which is kind of the opposite of what happened with Trudy, that already is interesting. Jeremy's example seemed to look at the heightening of dopamine in the hippocampus, but in Trudy, dopamine actually decreased, tending towards kind of thinking or a state of consciousness where she wasn't herself anymore. She was simply channeling any emotion, word, concept that was being held in the room, you know? And obviously in the inner dance, there could be an increase in nucleus accumbens activity, or when the body isn't moving so much, there could be a decrease, okay? So that's the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. Now, a third, maybe the most important dopamine activation in the brain body that happens in inner dance is called the nigrostriatal dopamine pathway. We'll be studying this. This has some complexity as to inhibition, stimulation, activities that happens. I'll maybe show some pictures, actual brain pictures, to show you where this is happening. So from the nigrostriatal source, you're sending dopamine into the striatum. Okay. Now, the striatum is a very, very powerful spiritual force in the brain. And when you send dopamine here, which needs to mix up with glutamate or either glutamate or GABA. This is when inner dance in its traditional classical sense really, really happens. And normally you're able to do that through a rerouting system. When you stop sending dopamine to the prefrontal cortex, it could very well happen that the striatum would receive more dopamine. And this brings us into basal ganglia awareness, that striatum is part of the basal ganglia. So if you want to open up the instinctual, non-thinking animal brain, simply send dopamine to the striatum. And the striatum is not just one structure, it's a group of structures, mostly the caudate nucleus, the putamen, the globus pallidus. So how to explain this? Very, very simple, actually. When you use music, especially what you might call inner dance music, when you choose different possibilities, like the example in Jeremy's was more probably classical inner dance, where there were changes in tempo, rhythm, tonality, textures. You're probably using more or less like different musical genres that are layered either in time or space. And in Trudy's experience, it wasn't so much changes, it was more intensity, but also something more constant, something more stable, for example. So you could see that there were different expressions in what was shared. So when you say inner dance, what do you actually mean? Those are very, very different experiences. Like in Jeremy's story, there was a lot of hippocampus activation. In Trudy's, definitely there was a lot of nucleus accumbens being worked out. And definitely she was in the striatum level, the striatum dimension. So you can call both of those inner dance, but they're also quite different from each other. The fourth I would bring up, even though we will not be able to discuss it so much yet, it's the tubero-infundibular. God, I've been waiting for so long to start talking about these really expensive words. Dopamine pathway. And the reason why this is important is dopamine has a role of dopamine inhibits prolactin. Normally, when you send out dopamine through the tubero-infundibular pathway, you inhibit prolactin. So when there is not that much dopamine, because dopamine is actually called prolactin inhibiting hormone, like an increase in prolactin could bring about early stages of psychosis. Okay, like high rates of prolactin could lead to early stages of psychosis. It could sometimes be the opposite as well, like very, very low levels of prolactin could actually also lead to psychosis. So when you look at the formulations in antipsychosis medicine, prolactin levels are either increased or decreased depending on what's happening. So that is why when you start to shift dopamine in the brain structures, either increasing or inhibiting, these very interesting spiritual, I mean, if you understand this maybe from an African tradition or a Balinese tradition, you wouldn't call it a psychosis, you'd call it a spiritual experience. just like in Singapore, it's a spiritual experience. But when you do bring science into it, psychosis, if we're not like afraid of the term, it's an interesting term. It's primarily because there's an altered state of perception, which could lead to deep states of transformation. I'm just pointing out to you that dopamine is very much responsible for actually what is studied mostly isn't just psychosis, it's schizophrenia. Yeah, so dopamine is very much interrelatable there. Okay, so these are the dopamine pathways. I hope you get to use these later on as maybe imaginatory functions. So, when you're studying, how are you holding the space? Are you more emotional? Are you more like able to tap into intelligence levels? Are you like animal brain? Already have this, you already have in these three really basic mapping, right? Maybe this is more the autonomic nervous system. And this already is more the limbic system. That there are differences. You're not just doing one inner dance. You could also access the cortex, the cortical system. So in the long term, we would study the limbic structures, the cortical structures, and the ANS structures. Now, let's go to the map. So you can keep going back to these later on the more you get interested. So these are the limbic maps. The amygdala is all about emotions. The hippocampus is about memory. The thalamus receives a lot of the sensations, the sensory pathways would lead to the thalamus, whether it be like auditory, visual, hypothalamus, we would keep studying. It's a very important part of the brain that regulates the sleep-wake cycle and almost everything autonomic, the things that you don't control. The hypothalamus helps to regulate that. We've talked about the basal ganglia. Now, the cingulate gyrus or cortex is very, very important, especially in terms of empathy, like how we are able to feel others. It helps us to achieve like a theory of mind, which allows us to maybe think about like how does she see the world through her eyes or through his eyes. I brought this up, sense of smell. So it's really basically important for people to understand that nearby emotions and memory is smell. And so smell compared to sound and light, this is going to be the most powerful sensory modality if you were to think about emotions. Now, later on, this is not the time to study it, but we would go into the cortical maps, okay? Just pointing out that we are studying the meta mapping. So if you know where they are, you can then check in and okay, what's the experience? Is it like deja vu, or is the mouse suddenly moving on its own? Like, does a person suddenly smell a thing? Or these are like a list of the feedbacks that happen in the inner dance. So depending on what you're activating, electricity wise, this is what might happen. So your different musical or touch techniques, they actually would determine where the energies would go. Okay, so we study this normally later on, but I would just like you to see where they're at. Maybe, yeah, the last we would study would be the endocrine system. Maybe that's much later on. And then, yeah, here, like already we're bringing these up. What we might really go deep into some of these, like oxytocin is important for bonding, and it's relatable to anxiety, stress, love, and trust. Vasopressin is a really interesting hormone, vasopressin is for men what oxytocin is often for women. Vasopressin allows dads to be good dads. So when there's moments where you see someone's not able to bond well with an offspring, a brother or sister, there's low vasopressin levels, especially in men. So we need to map these out somehow because let's say when we then start to study like these, when you start trying out different playlisting styles, instrumentations, what sort of songs, like in Trudy, they weren't using songs, they were using dialogue or words. What would be then the feedbacks? If, let's say, you treated like as a journey and you weren't trying to hold back the experience, actually getting Trudy to lay down, getting her to close her eyes, and rather than trying to expel the evil demon from her body, might you have actually taken her to different life aspects? It could be multiple dimensions, different lives, different memories. She might have spoken to really deep parts of her. So yeah, not using music anymore, just different techniques. So you can see where the tools need to interrelate with the brain parts that you will be undoubtedly affecting. Okay, so let's go back to this, and for now, let's go back to the board. We're vocabularizing for now, just so you can start doing things with these when they become familiar. Okay, so inner dance music. Changes in the music will create changes in the pathways of the brain, or you also have the chance to just hold something constantly without changing it so much, holding different levels of intensity. You will be routing these different possibilities or pathways. Okay, so I'm trying to maybe channel what's a good starting point. Let's start with Trudy. Like with Trudy, it was this. Let's map out what might have happened to Trudy. There was the sound bath, and the changes or alterations to her consciousness happened after the sound had more or less stopped. So that means most likely there was a lot of dopamine initially getting sent, but I feel that I feel that prolactin levels probably dropped in the beginning. So this is number one. Like in the beginning of the session, through the tuberoinfundibular pathway, dopamine increased, which then dropped prolactin levels. But then when the music stopped, I feel prolactin levels increased quite a bit. Prolactin is an amazing hormone. Its main function is usually to assist the mother to produce breast milk. But if it's not doing that, it can lead to the myelination of synapses, initially through what's called oligodendrocytes. So it leads to high intelligence levels. And this is what's happening in the brains of young children. So I think that's something that happened in the beginning, but definitely there was a lot of striatal activity that was occurring. By the way, to complete the map, dopamine through most of these are sent out through the VTA, or the ventral tegmental area. Okay, so when you do inner dance, you are instructing the ventral tegmental area to then start sending dopamine to all of these structures, mostly, except for the striatum. Okay, so not the hypothalamus, because that's the prolactin thing. So meaning that would mostly be in the let me see. Yeah, like VTA would be responsible for the mesocortical and the mesolimbic pathways. This number 3, it would be the substantia nigra, where dopamine would be sent from to speak to the striatum. You want like basal ganglia stuff to happen. You're not sending out from the VTA. They're beside each other, by the way. Let's see if we can find some maps where we could start to maybe look at these. Okay, so here are the subcortical regions. I wish I could have the time to find a better program that would help us to visualize the different regions. So this has more of the limbic systems mapped out. This would be the striatum, okay? These are very much responsible for the speed of information processing. So you want someone to go into a place where no time exists, affect the striatum. This is the striatum. It's these 3 elements here, and they're helping with the speed of information processing. So if you remember Inception or Interstellar, these movies that talked about multiple dimensions, if you want to bring about a change in persona, the striatum is the most kind of spiritual part of the brain in that way. The thalamus is here, which is responsible for receiving sensory inputs, whether it be sound, movement, touch, not smell. The smell aspect doesn't pass through the thalamus, but almost everything that you sense from the outside world, it would meet in the thalamus. It's kind of like the bus station before the information gets sent out to the auditory cortex, the visual cortex. And this is the hippocampus, which, as you maybe know by now, is responsible for memory. And then the amygdala is that which is responsible for fear, anxiety, and aggression. Okay, so let's go back to let's go back to Jeremy's question, which is the first asked today. And this is going to be very interesting for a lot of you who might be interested in what is fear, how do we create fear systems, and then how do we change fear? And let's relate that to inner dance. So let's write down fear. Because Jeremy's example is very, very clear that we store fear, and fear becomes a memory. So that do we look at that fear memory? How do we possibly heal not just the fear, but the memory of the fear? Because anxiety isn't so much about an actual pain. It's more a pain that was stored like in the body, right? We could later study the parts of the brain that stores pain. That's another concept altogether. Okay, so fear conditioning, so change this word, happens in this way. Now we've brought into existence the amygdala, that the amygdala is the part of the brain that registers fear. If you expose anyone to something scary, and in the example of Jeremy, the music brought about an anxiety that matched a childhood fear state, simply triggered the amygdala. Now, it's very interesting that a lot of people are actually born with very sensitive amygdaloid, like functions. And this is actually partly like culture based. The cultures and personalities that are more inward, let's say insular, introverted, like a lot of the Asians, a lot of the shy people, especially shy cultures. In Filipino, shy means ashamed. It's the same mechanism, but shame culture is an anthropological term. A lot of people who belong to shame cultures have very sensitive amygdalas. very, very sensitive amygdala. So it doesn't take much to activate emotions in certain personalities and cultures, whereby in other cultures, based on maybe the DNA structure, the instructions given by, the cell, or maybe because of exposure to the society, the prefrontal cortex would be more the dominant. So these be in cultures or personas that are less shy but more individualistic, more modern, So when we bring up, let's say, Singapore, already that's quite interesting because Singapore I read a long time ago that Singapore has the most millionaires in the world per capita. It's one of the most modernized cities in the world. There's a great degree of prefrontal cortex activation. There's a high level of intelligence in the Singaporean brain. But because of the Asiatic, the Buddhist, the Hindu, the Malay, the Chinese, the Indian, the Singaporean brain is very, very amygdala dominant as well. So even though emotions can be repressed often, embedded is this, it's still very much like a collective society, like Japan, like China, like Korea, like the Philippines. We do have different brain types. And for people who have very dominant prefrontal cortex activation, there's a lot of healing when we then sensitize the amygdala that might be desensitized. But it could also be just as true that people who have overly sensitive emotional structures, that there could be developmental stages that takes place in the prefrontal cortex. Okay, we'll talk more about those later. For now, we're interested in fear conditioning. How do we condition fear? How do we create fear? There are different types of fear. Now, maybe the older fears are the ones that are innate. They don't get conditioned. They were there. You were born with them. They're usually called phobias. So, for example, you get a cat who's no, let's say you get a mouse, and the mouse has never been exposed to cats, and suddenly you put a cat in the room. Just the smell of the cat would alarm the amygdala of the mouse, and the mouse would know that I need to run away. So there would be an increase in aggression, anxiety, or fear in the mouse because of the innate fear that was there at birth. That's how we see programming doesn't just happen through nurture. It happens through what nature had already inbuilt. So then you have the fears that are learned, and this is something maybe we're more interested in, the more learned fears. And what would those be? Would it be the fear of not having enough money, fear of not belonging, fear of missing 2 meals a day, or plane crashing? I think the two basic innate human baby fears would be the fear of loud noises and falling down. Most fears are learned for many humans. So let's study initially how fears are conditioned. Let's see. One way of going about this is to maybe learn where these two types of fear are situated. Now, innate fears are located in the middle of the amygdala, the central amygdala. Okay, so natural fears are okay. They help to protect us from the dinosaurs or from meteors hitting the earth, so that we would, just have healthy interactions with the world around us, so that we don't get eaten by something big. We don't get, struck by snakes when we see them slithering the ground. If you see a Trudy slithering in the ground, like what part of your brain would get triggered? Okay, learned fears are located more in what's called the basolateral amygdala. So how you might imagine this is the basolateral amygdala is like the wrapper. It's like the outer layer surrounding the central amygdala. Okay. And they're very connected to each other. Like so let's say you haven't really feared something yet. Okay. Like this is where the maps would be interesting. Okay, like here. So knowing that the amygdala is responsible for emotion, and then here is where you receive the sensory input. Let's say you hear like a sound, the thalamus would register that, okay, it's just a sound. It doesn't mean anything, it's just a sound. But every time you hear the sound and then you experience a fear, do you see how a fear is learned? That's how conditioning works. That's how Pavlovian conditioning or operant conditioning works. You expose someone enough to a pain, there will be a fear. And if that pain is always coexisting with that particular stimulus, then every time they see that or hear that, they will feel that. And do that often enough, and the hippocampus will just keep remembering that. Okay, so that's how fear is programmed. Let's look at that once again from like a mapping.
All right, I think this brought up something really interesting. So can I just jump
Okay.
in here quickly?
Yes.
So after we talked about and he shared about the memory that he was afraid of the needle. He shared also that as he was growing up, he was abused by his mother a lot. So there was a lot of pain. So I think I'm starting to see the correlation to, okay, early on he got abused by his mother, whether it was like physical violence or verbal violence. And now here he is, in another scenario where pain was registered, or the fear of pain was about to happen in the hospital bed, right? And therefore the trigger response came up. That is that learned response that was coming up through the inner dance as well. So I'm starting to see the correlations now. Yeah.
Beautiful. It's actually quite simple when you think about it, that we know this intuitively. It helps to have an anatomical visualization because all you have to do is actually reverse the process. In the inner dance, we are triggering the amygdala for sure. We can trigger the hippocampus. We're definitely triggering the thalamus because you're getting them to listen to some very intense frequencies and vibrations. So especially, let's say, when you use smell, that will trigger emotions as well. Let's go back to the map, and I'm glad this is firing some connections. So I think it's already quite interesting to learn that the amygdala has two spaces, and I feel maybe we triggered Trudy's central amygdala more than her basolateral amygdala. The shortcut is normally people just write BLA. So then you would know what BLA means, basolateral amygdala, which is responsible for learned fear. So mapping that out, let's say you hear a tone, and then you match that with a pain. And when those are conducted together, you have fear. So the opposite of fear conditioning is then the reverse of that process. That would be called fear extinction. Fear extinction. So this is what you could do. Like, let's say you give them the tone, activate them with something scary, something that will activate the heart rate, increase blood pressure. And then the more you do that, when that's happening, allowing people to be scared, say the fear is there, but the pain isn't there, actually. It's like, okay, I am allowed to be scared. I'm afraid. And this tone just keeps scaring me, but then I'm not actually feeling pain. as much, then that's how fear extinction could happen. But this needs to be made a little bit more complex. Like let's say going back to these kinds of mappings, let's then go into the dorsolateral and ventromedial places in the prefrontal cortex. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of the prefrontal cortex. Maybe you know what it is. The prefrontal cortex is in the frontal lobe, and it's very much responsible for learning, attention. It's also responsible for language production mostly. It's what allows us to be control freaks, to be overthinkers, over planners, and so on and so forth. So understanding that the prefrontal cortex is subdivided into different regions, mostly the dorsolateral and the ventromedial. Let me show you how this works. So let's say you are caught in a situation where you would get triggered by a fear. So let's say the amygdala would be here. So let's say you are, let's take a really bad situation. Let's say you're riding an airplane, and then this thing starts to go all kinds of turbulent, and oh no, I'm gonna die. I'm going to die. This is my last day on earth, and so on and so forth. Okay, what about something just as scary? Let's say you're walking along like a deserted pathway, and then it's very, very dark, and then suddenly someone walks out and has like really weird hair, and oops, I'm not erasing you, just drawing. Someone has really weird hair and make it even weirder. Oops. And then you know, it's really dark, you're alone, and he's holding like either something like this or something like this. Okay, so very much you will trigger the amygdala. It's like ooh, heart rate goes up, adrenaline gets sent out, cortisol levels are sent to the SA node in the heart, further increasing the heartbeat when it mixes with norepinephrine. The reactions would be to fight or to run away, or very commonly for many people, like, I don't know what to do. I'm simply here. I'm paralyzed. And you're like praying to God. You're just in utter shock. All right. So here, the amygdala is very much connected to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. It doesn't have many connections with the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So the role of the ventromedial, okay, ventromedial PFC is to actually help to modulate the fear in the amygdala. So if there's something inside you that starts to reason out, like, oh my God, oh, wait a minute. What if this guy is actually not going to kill me? Maybe he's going to a costume party. Is it Halloween? So when you start to slow down this a little bit, that this isn't racing so fast, and say it's just like a little bit up, and you're able to slow it down through sending out acetylcholine, allowing the parasympathetic nervous system to get you to trust rather than to fight or freeze or run away. The prefrontal cortex is able to help you not be scared, in other words. So fear extinction would necessitate the uncoupling of the sensory input. It could be a visual input, an auditory input, like a touch input, anything that can allow people to be scared. But if there were other experiences there that might be coupled with not pain, but let's say pleasure, or maybe even like insight, like, oh wow, like I'm seeing something else, and that's still coming with the sound or the frequency that normally brings about pain. It's like you're now training the brain, body, and mind to to um to be scared, but without running away. Okay, the fear should still be there. The fear should still be there, but there needs to be other options where you maybe, what are your options? Like, okay, I'm gonna hug that guy, or maybe I'll just give him a kiss, or give him a riddle, or ask him a question, or maybe it would change the situation, you know? So I think we can learn to be courageous whilst also having the vulnerability of um, being afraid. And a lot of these are according to how we were brought up, their personality typing, their cultural typologies. They might be, but what they are autonomic, because the autonomic nervous system is that interface in the mind and body that allows us to connect to the world around us, right? The autonomic nervous system helps us to react to the world, but the brain interprets that in the neocortex and the amygdala to maybe interpret, should I be scared, or should I be brave? Okay, so these are just some examples of how the triune brain mapping could be approached later on when we are faced with these difficult, interesting questions that were shared today from Trudy, Fiona, and Jeremy. Let's go back to this initial. Okay, so this is just an introduction. This is something that would.
Hi,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry. I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, once the fear appears in the session and you're talking about the fear extension, uh, this will happen with, like, let's say after the session, like you acknowledge the fear
Mm.
and you choose to change. So the change will happen eventually because you change your actions, or it will happen automatically in the chemistry of the brain.
It needs to be always both. I think the wisdom in tapping into the autonomic nervous system is note this down. The autonomic nervous system organizes our response mechanisms. Either we respond in fear or we respond in trust. Slow down the heart rate or increase the heart rate. What programs that is not what's happening around us now. What program that is usually the past. So if there was trauma, some people, even if it's not scary, they get scared. There's a lot of people who are very fear-based because of all those conditioning. So one of the big reasons why we're conducting inner dance is to allow people to be scared without being afraid. It's because we need to transform the response mechanisms, which is so quick and sensitized in some people that they cannot. Just for example, looking at the amygdala versus the prefrontal cortex, there are personas that really get emotional and take things really personally, and yet there are a lot of people who are able to take criticism and are able to think slowly and not have the same sensitivity. So in the inner dance, what I'm saying here is there's a way to either activate the emotions, but when you get stuck with that, without then possibly activating insight or intelligence, if it's just the emotion, there will be less of a possible healing there as opposed to. So here's a technique. The actual change can happen within the session itself. So for example, when you use a particular music that triggers them into an emotion, it's when you change that music that they would sometimes respond differently. You see what I mean? There could be like this anger, this aggression, this shame. And then when you change it to something positive, something life affirming, whatever it is that they were looking at, it could be the doctor with the needle, or it could be like a monster. The monster would transform into a rainbow, or it would transform into their grandmother, and then some kind of conversation would happen. So it's usually in the interface between the different stimuli that could amount to the change. You see what I mean? First, you get them into fear because that's where courage can come from. You bring them into sadness because that's where joy can come from. Bring them into anger, and then forgiveness can come through. So a lot of people, they're hiding a lot of these emotions and memories, and you can actually change someone's past. People think that they can only change their future. You can change someone's past by changing the way they're hiding their reactions or maintaining their reactions. It can break the loop, right? Thank you. Julia.
Hi, thanks. Haré mi pregunta en español. No sé si alguien, Val, no sé, hola,
Claro,
¿me
yo te
puedes
ayudo.
ayudar en la traducción? Gracias, Val.
Claro.
Tú, Val, hablaste hace alrededor de media hora de la prolactina, ¿cierto? Entre otros químicos, ¿cierto? Cerebrales que el cerebro va segregando. Y tú, si mal no entendí, indicas que la prolactina de alguna manera incide en que las personas puedan tener en la experiencia inner dance una especie de psicosis o algo parecido.
Un momento, amor, por favor. So she's going back to the
Val, Val, I can read the translations. Let her
Perfect.
know I can actually understand her. And if those who don't understand Spanish need it, like just open your captioning and we can just read her words.
Perfect. Que él tiene la transcripción,
Sí.
así que ya te está
Ok.
leyendo, mi cielo.
Gracias. Ok, entonces, mi pregunta es, hay personas que per se tienen prolactina alta, ejemplo, mujeres menopáusicas, o bien otra situación, digamos, relacionadas con enfermedades de base. Ellas están más susceptibles a tener estos episodios de psicosis.
Yes, like for example, the disease or sickness that is most related to prolactin would be multiple sclerosis or MS, because MS is related to very low levels of myelination, like in the brain structures and in the spine. So they have very you need prolactin in order to myelinate your system. So I've I've heard of a recent case, for example, where a kind of psychosis happened with someone with MS. But it's not so simple because prolactin needs to counteract with other chemicals that amplify the effects of the rising up and down. What's important, I think, to realize if we bring up prolactin is what is the role of prolactin? Emotionally, it helps with the connection between the mother and the child, or between a person and another person. It's still related to trust. So I think a lot of people who have histories of distrust, of skepticism, of not being very connected with other people, rather than just looking at it from a chemical perspective, what people are yearning for is love. And sometimes the psychosis can happen when there's a dimension that's something to do with this issue.
Ok. Segunda pregunta y última. Viene a mí, ¿qué pasa con las personas que tienen fatiga adrenal, donde el cortisol está disparado, ¿cierto? Fatiga crónica, etcétera. Porque ya de por sí, como te digo, estas hormonas están muy arriba, están en la sangre, están muy, muy presentes, entonces les es más difícil entrar en la experiencia inner dance.
So it really depends on the way the process is being facilitated. But a lot of people who are conducting energy work in general, especially the ones that are coming from the Kundalini schools, there are musical elements that are being used for raising adrenaline and cortisol levels because of the activation of the adrenal cortex, which is still related to the hypothalamus and the stress response mechanism. It's called the HPA axis. This is something we'll go into later on. So if we learned more about like the more inhibitory, relaxing elements, then we learn to also use GABA, which is inhibiting, or acetylcholine, serotonin, oxytocin. So it helps to balance out. This is to say, we don't want to cancel out that dopamine and cortisol and adrenaline, they're very, very important in terms of opening people up. But without a balancing, definitely psychosis can happen. But psychosis can happen even with relaxing situations as well. It really depends on what is going on. Like for me, I'm not as worried about these because I can normally facilitate when it happens, but we can balance it out. There's usually many tools that are in the wave of rising and falling that we can study. It's either we rise, we fall, we rise, we fall. But what we have realized is more balancing is the rising and falling can happen at the same time. This can be through music. This can be through the way you're holding the room. It's a less dualistic space, like in a way. It's like exciting as a technique. Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Okay, Val, your turn.
So, because we're talking about extreme cases like Jeremy and Trudy, I definitely would love to understand what happened to me at Maya, because if somebody goes through that, I want to understand the why. Because for the people that are here new, or I'm new to your life and heart, to put it into context, it was an inner dance session. Yes, of course, the vibration of Maya, outdoors, the fire. You can imagine the scenery, right? The music doesn't even have to play, and you're already in the zone. So for me, I thought I was done with my processes. I was third time in Maya. I was feeling peace and love, fire, stars, Mother Earth in heaven. And I'm here saying to myself, I'm gonna actually hold a space for the friends and people that were there. And I'm not gonna go into the energy, not as a facilitator. I was gonna help, but I was just gonna sustain that from my little corner in my little dream with the stars in the heavens and the Mother Earth. And then this energy hits me when I specifically said, I am not going into the process. I'm just going to chill and relax. And it hits me, just to put it into context to everybody, in a way that I literally thought I would die. Like, I'm not exaggerating. Vidi was there, Cassis was there. Like, I stopped being able to pass air. I went into an asthma attack, trauma attack, crying hysterically. And then I had white clothes on, and I was like, I can't get my breath. Something is happening. The fire all of a sudden had a turn in the fire, and I saw myself, and I was covered in blood. So why I was choking is because the blood was coming out of the nose and the mouth. And so the question, more very punctual, is like, I went into the space, not going into the space, in a place of my life that I thought, okay, third time around with Maya, and all the internal processes, writing a book, everything I've done, I'm like, I'm just gonna enjoy the moment. And this is like something just shook me, and left me into aphasia. So I want to understand what happened, because it really, if it happens as a facilitator, and after big hundreds of processes that I've seen and I've been able to facilitate, I've never seen anything like that, other than when I spoke to you about it, you said it happened to you. So I just want to understand those 2 points. Me not wanting to go into the space, and it just dragged me and tore me apart. But for the record of this call, I mean, so much, I'm like floating in the clouds all day. I think it needed to happen, but it's a miracle that I'm here speaking to you guys, because it was brutal. It was really brutal. So yeah, I just want to understand the process.
Okay. It's really important to stay with the notes, because we have been explaining it already, but we want to go deeper, then let's go deeper. so we've spoken about the, let's say, the amygdala versus the prefrontal cortex region. So let's say, okay, it wasn't an inner dance process, but it happened. So we would say there's like a lessening of prefrontal cortex activity, and there's a heightening of amygdala activity. So the amygdala has several inputs and outputs, and one of its most important input output areas would be connected to what you tapped into right there, Val. One of the connections or interconnections the amygdala has is with the periaqueductal gray. Okay, this would relate to what Jeremy had brought up. Now, the periaqueductal gray, or the oops, it went really near. Okay, it you can call it the PAG. And why this might be interesting is this is related to what it's related to pain. It's also related to panic attacks. And it's situated in a part of the brain connected to the spine that really registers the deepest fears. You know, like you want to process fear, go to the PAG. That's where it's hiding. Now, the other interesting input-output interconnection of the amygdala is the insular cortex. And it's technically outside of the limbic system, but because it's so connected to the limbic system, it's an honorary part. Now, this is usually related to the emotion of disgust. Now, this would then answer one of the questions that Fiona had raised, which is the vomiting reflex or the gag reflex. Okay, the insular cortex is very much still a reptilian brain function, and if you have this wonderful way of this is separate, this is too close. If you have this wonderful way of shutting down your mind, okay, not thinking, okay, I'm going to process this in the most autonomic, most body-based memories. What are my deepest memories? Shut down the mind, turn on the emotional body, which would still later interrelate with the autonomic nervous system, especially, let's say, in connection to the hypothalamus. I feel what happened to you was not just the ANS system. There was a lot of endocrine system, like glandular functions that needed to be reworked. I think in your nervous system, whether it be your pituitary, your thyroid, and a lot of the other circuits. Like let's say the HPA circuit would be the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal circuit. The HPA is responsible for stress, you know, to really heal the person, to really deal with that, you know, really allow yourself to process like the deepest fears. The hypothalamus has a nucleus that hides the like even more fear than the amygdala. Okay, it's called primal fear. So I feel you were brave enough to tap into that, which is paradoxical. The opposite of brave is to be scared. So you allowed yourself to go into one of the most terrifying moments of your life, and just being able to do that allows you to, okay, I've been through that. It didn't kill me. Still here. It's good. So that's the point, that when you lessen the powers of the mind, emotions will come up. But when you also have much too high emotions, you wanted to modulate emotion. Remember, like the point of ventromedial prefrontal cortex intervention is important. You remember that whole story with that pathway in Maya? We talk about the clown, but there was a guy with a gun or a knife. The amygdala would remember the gun, the hippocampus would remember the place where the bad thing was happening. Okay, that's memory. Meeting, anxiety. I would say that with your story, Val, you're undergoing a fear extinction that's primal in nature. I mean, that's what I would love to believe anyway. It doesn't have to be. Let's say, oh, that was a really bad thing. I hope it would never happen again. But because you experienced it, then the fear actually could go down because of the uncoupling between the actual let's say your biggest fear would be the fear of dying. So let's say you wanted to face that. If that was undergoing an extension, it would be the symptoms of dying, but without you actually dying. So that's primal fear going away. And that's where like slowly, like a really infinite level of courage could come through. Okay, so thank you for your questions so far. I wanted to go into a meta mapping because I think we can start to just have conversation in a bit. But I do want to finish the outlining that is the point of the day. We can't cover everything today. Okay, so remember there are these systems that we would be studying: the autonomic nervous system, which is comprised of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. We've already looked at the limbic structures, which you could become more interested in: the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, the amygdala. What else is there? The thalamus, the basal ganglia, and then you have the neocortex, which is responsible for cognitive thought, higher order thought, higher order intelligence. Now, I want to show you what we had embedded quietly without being explicit today in the discussions. The neocortex and the limbic system are going to need to be mediated between each other. There's a relationship between what you might call the mind and emotions. So something needs to perform that bridge work. There is also a mediation happening between emotions and autonomic body functions. Okay, like autonomic means automatic body functions. So when we study these in the long term, say, let's just remove this because the mapping needs to be somewhere here. The mediator for the mind, emotion, body would be the prefrontal cortex. So even before we map this out, I want you to understand that we have been studying it in the last hour, like how you could mediate like heavy emotions, big emotions, deep emotions, and your thoughts. Are you trying to empty your mind, or are you which means you can feel more? But if you're feeling too much, when you're too emotional, the mind needs to kick in and needs to help you to process your fears so that you realize that maybe I'm not going to get shot. I'm not going to die in a plane crash right now. So the mind needs to start activating at a certain point. Now, understand the prefrontal cortex doesn't actually go fully online in most adults until they are in their mid 20s. Do you find that interesting? That there's a reason why a lot of teenagers or adolescents are so dependent on their limbic structures. Why are teenagers so damn emotional? It's because the prefrontal cortex is not fully online yet. Now, this is important primarily as much of the spiritual work that is being learned is about like thinking less, feeling more. So when you do that, you are definitely placing an emphasis on limbic structure activation, which could help people to feel but it would also sometimes decrease mental awareness, especially with some techniques that could be used in like inner dance Kundalini style processes. That's why we've been shifting over the last 5 or 6 years to help balance. So yeah, the prefrontal cortex will be important as the interface between the limbic and the neocortex. So either you are shutting it off, but it actually does hold a role in mediating like the fear states. And then what bridges the limbic structures and the autonomic nervous system is basically called the hypothalamus, a magical, powerful part of the brain that can regulate everything automatic, but a lot of that automaticity is actually being modulated or governed by emotions. When people are holding aggression, fear, anxiety, that would regulate your sleep-wake cycle. Okay, that would regulate your your heart rate. If you're, let's say you're always anxious or you can't sleep at night, or let's say you are you're not breathing properly, you're basically stressed out. Or not you, let's say you're working on someone who has high stress levels. Instead of just working in the autonomic nervous system, there's something in the limbic structure that is dominating the automatic. And what is it that then mediates the emotional? It's certain elements or structures in the mind. So we can't just keep destroying mental functions. The mind needs to activate at a certain point. And this is actually what we're doing here. You don't have to learn any of these, but giving your spirit the actual anatomy and how you are conditioning fear and aggression and love, your body will appreciate it because your body does know, but your mind does not always. So especially maybe when you're facilitating or conducting trainings later on, you would be seeing people would appreciate this as well. It's like, okay, you're giving me a manual of how my body actually works. Maybe I knew that, but maybe this was not presented to me in a way that makes sense in a kind of almost spiritual way as well. Let's open the room for questions or insights or ideas. There's a lot that was shared. There's a lot more, but we need to take it slowly because we will study these in the long term. Like, what do you find could further some of your thoughts? Or yeah, thank you for listening. Yeah, Fiona, I thought it would be you.
Thanks. So I did process a little bit of like your idea and what Ituli said as well. If all of us were responsible in the room with what Trudy was experiencing, if Winnie didn't think it's a passion, and if I was there, I was not home. I was there when Trudy started her process, it might have turned out differently. I actually went through that. What if I was there and I know that she's going through an emotional process, then a possession? If Winnie didn't think that it's a possession, and all of us didn't trigger our cultural beliefs, because we were all in a common cultural belief system. And what if that belief system was not in place? Then Trudy may not have felt that it was a possession.
Even already the story is so telling as to what increased the amygdala and basal ganglia activation, because she was already kind of somewhere else, but then they keep putting on the music, and already we heard what the mantra did. It was holding so much. But I would say it's actually their intention, which we knew was coming from anxiety. They didn't want that to happen to her because the big fear of humans, like fear of losing control. What if she doesn't come back? What if she jumps out of the window? In Singapore, that's not really always a good thing. We're working through these scenarios. We're all going to get in trouble. The government will take us now and put us in these, like, with the white lab coat thing. We are recognizing just how prefrontal cortex Singaporeans are, like very, very controlling, very thinking, very planning. So what happened to Trudy is going to happen to a lot of other people. So I think a healthy balance of some spiritual frame, you can still talk about the aliens, cosmic, whatever, but taking responsibility would mean helping her to understand these are aspects of you. Okay, you wanna have a conversation, let's have fun, but take ownership. Don't try to make it exit the room, become friends with it, okay, what do you want to say? But there was a lot of fear. There was anxiety in the room for sure. And you probably absorbed some of that when you came in. That mixed with your own anxiety because, oh, I'm responsible. I need to fix this. It's a problem. But Trudy wasn't necessarily thinking it was a problem. She basically switched into a certain mode when people were trying to go into a problem-solving situation. She wasn't there. If you actually left her alone a little bit, and not try to facilitate as much using space cleansing tools. There could have been something there. I would have been interested in just getting her to lay down really comfortably. If I use sound, it would be not triggering at all. Mantras are very, very charged. And then it could be 30 minutes or an hour. She might go into a journey. Yeah.
I'm curious because during the session I was there, and I wanted to get Trudy to lie down, but she actually was not. She was constantly on her side, right? I was there trying to get her to lie down, but her natural body refused to go into a face up position. She was constantly on her side, right? Even though I tried to make her go into direction without trying to force her, she actually just really constantly was like that.
Okay. Let's do some basic mapping for those who are new here. This is like something we need to do anyway, because it's part of it's the course itself. When we do study the autonomic nervous system, which is primarily consisting of the sympathetic fight or flight mechanism and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is resting and digesting. When there's a simultaneous co-activation between the stimulatory and inhibitory mechanisms of the body, then when these two are happening at the same time, inner dance will take place. So I think with Trudy, what would be interesting to study is when we like look at this talks about like sleep-wake cycle, which is the dream state. The reason why we go to sleep is to go into the REM state. There are different types of dreams, and one of the most interesting dream experiences is lucid dreaming. Okay, now when you normally dream, you're not lucid. You get hyper emotional, even hyper sensual sometimes, or hyper weird. One of the things that needs to shut down is there cannot be a PFC activation in the REM experience, and even in the non-REM, PFC needs to be shut off. So when PFC turns on, what happens is lucid dreaming takes place. So yeah, you telling me that Trudy couldn't lay down it means that there was a lot of PFC and limbic and autonomic stuff still going on. So even when she was in this kind of channeling experience, her mind was still functioning. She was actually still very conscious and just observing it, wondering about it. There are a lot of people, they literally just lose their mind. They're just purely in their emotions. So with Trudy, I would say there wasn't so much like a battle. A battle is where one would dominate the other. She was able to turn on the three systems all at once. You know what I mean? Because when we're like at work, when you're in the MRT, you're very much PFC. You can't go into an emotional catharsis in Orchard Road. You can't do that at the airport. You need to shut that down. But we're learning to hyperactivate it because of what's hidden. What Trudy was able to do is she was able to go into her emotions and her autonomic nervous system, but her prefrontal cortex is still very much not in control, but in witnessing, in observation. And I thought that was really cool. Yeah. Let's go to Julia and then we'll go to Trudy.
Ok, gracias, Pai. Bueno, yo soy de Latinoamérica, Chile precisamente, y en nuestro entorno está muy arraigado el cristianismo. Y desde ahí, claro, me parece importante tocar ese tema porque, como les dije, acá está muy arraigado. No he tenido experiencias como las que Fiona menciona, sino otra experiencia relacionada con lo que en América se denomina vudú, magia vudú. Me tocó atender a un consultante que en teoría, digamos, fue víctima de ese tipo de energía. Pues bien, yo simplemente hice lo que me enseñaron. Energía siempre neutra, no juzgando ni prejuzgando absolutamente nada. Lo raro que pasó, y aquí voy a entrar un poco al, no sé, no sé si se podría llamar retrocausalidad, Pai. Cuando yo iba a esa sesión, por esas cosas extrañas, tuve un impulso de tomar una piedra, cuarzo cristal. Cuando llegué a la sesión y esta persona me dice todo lo que ha pasado, un hombre no podía caminar, estuvo más de un año yendo a las mejores clínicas de Santiago de Chile, haciendo un montón de exámenes de diversa complejidad para determinar qué era lo que estaba causando su enfermedad. Él no podía caminar, no podía moverse. Y los médicos le decían que él estaba bien. Todos sus exámenes salían fisiológica, biológicamente, motoramente, si se puede llamar así, todo bien. Y lo atribuía a este tipo de magia. Pues bien, comencé a hacer la sesión y tuve el impulso de usar esta piedra. Y la usé de manera bastante intuitiva. Terminó la sesión, él lo pasó genial. Él es muy agradecido de la experiencia que tuvo y se fue. Y yo quedé ahí bien, nunca tuve miedo, nunca dejé entrar también ese miedo, ni en mí, ni en el espacio. ¿Te fijas? En el primer ciclo, cuando tú hablabas de los principios del Inner Dance, me vino a la mente este principio, no el principio, sino que la retrocausalidad. Y ahí pude comprender que en definitiva la energía o la intención, digamos, la pone uno como canalizador, como, digamos, al estar al servicio de la persona. Entonces, me quedó claro que La energía es neutra, completamente.
Mm,
No es ni buena ni mala, es simplemente. Y es lo que pasa en la sesión. En la sesión pude comprender que en la sesión no pasan cosas ni buenas ni malas.
mm,
Y
yeah.
todo ocurre porque la persona necesita vivir X
Mm,
emoción o lo que sea.
mm, mm.
Gracias.
Gracias. Also, yeah, beautiful. I think the first principle that comes out of the inner dance that needs to be more and more clear is everything is inside. Everything we need is inside. And one of the illusions that people carry is that I need something from the outside. So when we sometimes present the energy work as, okay, like you need me, I will heal you. Your story is beautiful in the sense that no one has to heal anyone. Like everything the man needed was already inside. And this really happened because there was trust. I think what the problem often comes up when we lose trust or when we hold a space, maybe we were still working on that trust level. And when something really strange happens that's difficult to understand, if we lose that trust, the chances where the transformation could take place, it might lessen. So we have to be able to communicate that. So some people in the world, whether it be people or institutions, could be hospitals or schools or governments, could be addiction spaces. Um, Primarily what a lot of people are really looking for is trust. We're going into the science because there's a lot of people who would trust more if the context was there, which also helps us to hold the energy more intelligently with also a lot of love. But I think the first principle, which is coming from the child, is really like you have everything already in your body to heal yourself, and you should just trust it. So I think if the music, the vibration can communicate that, we are not healing anyone. We're creating the conditions where people can heal themselves from inside, which is the real healing. So I loved your story. It really speaks about that principle. Okay, Trudy, we would be really interested to speak to you now after sharing in the beginning and now hearing everything and every what I spoke and what everyone spoke. What do you think or feel?
Okay, I'm still processing. So I do have a question though about responsibility, right? Because we're talking so much about taking responsibility, and actually in life it's actually it's very, very important. So how much control does a person who is in an inner dance state, right, have in terms of personal responsibility? So could I, obviously I didn't, but could I have in the state that I was done anything, right, despite whatever is happening around me, right? Could I have done anything to change it?
Okay, really important question. I'm glad this is being asked. Go back to the screen with this. So, okay, there are these three functions, right? The neocortex, the limbic, and the automatic. So mental, emotions, and the autonomic system. Now, because you, let's say, decrease the neocortex or the prefrontal cortex at least had in terms of your state of consciousness, you're less mind, you're more your reptilian brain and your emotions like speaking through, these were higher. One thing that takes place that's quite weird has to do with the word that you mentioned is control. Like the question is like, who is in control? What is controlling me right now? And am I in control, or is something else in control of me? Now, this is quite complex. It's not easy to map out. When we talk about the prefrontal cortex power getting lessened or decreased, we're not as mentally controlling. So now our emotions start to come over and the autonomic nervous system comes over. Now, the prefrontal cortex, important as it may be, um, it might um, it might not always know everything. So that's why the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, as compared to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, we can't just rely on the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. The ventral medial prefrontal cortex helps us to become more responsible from an emotive or emotional point of view. And sometimes our emotions have so much to offer and teach us that the mind cannot always see. So the only thing is, when you go too much into emotions and the automatic nervous system, okay, there are two types of control. It's either you have, this is called the locus of control, if you wanted to look at the psychological interest in this. So either people have an external locus or an internal locus of control. So let's say people who are more individualized, have strong ego, have strong identity, they have a stronger internal locus of control. So internal could either be strong or weak. So people who have ego, they have strong internal locus of control. Now, people who are not exactly in an egoic space, they're more, let's say, sensitive to the environment. So let's say, think about the Japanese, the Koreans, the Filipinos. People don't always act out of ego. They're very, very sensitized to the sociality or the social structures, that they don't really act unless things are appropriate, or that they're behaving according to the rules. So the locus of control in societies and personas like this is more what you might call social. So obviously, what you partially broke, Trudy, was it's like I don't give an F right now. Like, whatever. I'm tired of being like other people's um thoughts, but at the same time, even as you were discovering your internal locus of control, you were actually sensitizing yourself to a very high locus of social control, meaning what was happening in the room, your body was channeling and reacting or responding to. So that's why this issue of control is kind of hard to understand, because you are increasing your internal locus of control, which is good. It means you're finding your own voice through your body movements, through your subconscious, not dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. It's more autonomic nervous system and amygdala, limbic system. But it was making you super duper responsive to the environment. You had more of your true self coming through, but there was so much happening in your environment. That's why my suggestion was there could have been an option where, if you were facilitated upon, if there wasn't as much intervention, they would hold a space for you, they would contain you, but they wouldn't try to manipulate or control the situation, not try to heal a problem. Then the internal locus of control would be heightened, but at the same time, the environment, the external locus of control, is supporting the growth process. So you could have controlled the situation. You did not, because it was probably feeling really good because you access something very deep. And it's not a mental thing, it's like a brain state. And imagine that some people would take a drug. You can't shut that down once it's operating like that. So let's say you have that internal chemistry that had elevated. But definitely you can shut off a drug if you set the right conditions. Turn on the lights, ask people to open their eyelids a lot more. You would notice probably like maybe the environment was dark-ish. The lights weren't totally on or bright, I would just turn the lights on bright if I wanted to stop it. But I wouldn't do it. I would probably just support the process so that there is neuroplasticity happening there. There is actually changes in your brain mapping that could lead to, more courage, more wisdom, more forgiveness, more like whatever it is that your subconscious is working with. Yeah.
Thank you. So this implies, right, that as a facilitator, it's a very fine line. How, in terms of intervention, and I actually earlier I had a thought crossed my mind, right? It's like, as a facilitator, how much does our energy, how much does the state that we are in as a facilitator, right, impact or influence the experience that's there? And I mean, in this case, right, it was just me, right? There wasn't anybody else around. But if there was a situation where it wasn't just me and there was other people around, right? Then surely this experience itself, not just the facilitators, but what I was going through in the room would influence or have an impact on other people that might have been going through the process themselves too. Right?
That situation is okay. That usually happens. The preconditioning for that to happen is trust. If people weren't trusting, that won't happen to a group level. If that's happening to the individual, that is like a tendency that will happen. So if people were trusting, then that's actually allowed because either there's enough context that was given that allowed people to feel safe. People know each other. They know that the police won't come, the psychiatrist won't come, you won't get in trouble, the husband won't get in the way, the children are off in the bed sleeping. So when you create that safe context, admittedly, really strange, interesting things will happen. So that trust level cannot shift no matter what. That is the first thing. No matter what happens, that trust level should keep holding the space. So when we talk about techniques, or the energy of the facilitator, it could be what you're doing or your own presence. What we learned from your story and Fiona's account is the paradigm determines the techniques. Whatever tools you're using, the belief structure in the room will be using those tools. So it's not about the tools. It's not about just lighting Palo Santo or bringing out the drum. It's actually like, what do we know? What do we believe? And all that will hold the space together. So the way things are opened are very, very powerful. Always like the first words, the paragraphs, the storytelling. What stories do you tell in the beginning? And then how do you hold that all throughout? The story has a beginning and goes all the way to the end. There's like a kind of narrative. When you walk into a space as a facilitator, that will often be holistic. Meaning if you're in a good space, then you're taking care of yourself and you're trusting. When you're offering a sacred ground, normally that's actually quite clear. And maybe you have notes, or maybe your body is like mapping it out very well. You would know it if you feel good, if you're like really in this space of insight. So paradigm is very beautiful. It's like what's the worldview here? Yeah. Because we are paradigm shifting, right? We're shifting through paradigms. That's why we're doing this. Everything you need is inside you. You're always evolving. You're loved. You're supported. We speak these words, and these are helping people move from no one loves me. I'm poor. I'm really, I'm stupid. I don't know anything. And then you affirm these other visions and paradigms in the space.
Thank you. Just one other thing that's been running through my mind. I haven't sort of like come to any conclusion on it, right? Is what you're talking about in terms of paradigms and belief systems, right? So if in our culture, and actually I do believe in spirits, yeah. In our culture, if the belief system is there, and then like for me, now that this has happened, and I'm looking at it from a totally different perspective because of the scientific information, right? I'm still digesting it. Then I think the question I have for myself is, what does that do for me in terms of like my belief system? So do I hold on to my belief system, or do I chuck it out totally, right? And because there are still examples around, or there are instances around, right, where the idea of spirit comes true as well. I mean, we live in a society that's like that, right? And sometimes when people talk about paranormal, it happens, and it actually happens, and somebody tells you about it, right? Or you see it with your own eyes. Then it's a disconnect with that this whole situation, right? This thing. I mean, I think that's where I'm sitting at right now. So what do I do with my belief system?
It's good to be honest. Number one, we're not canceling out spirituality at all. It's just that a lot of our spirituality has been influenced by even when we were in a mythological interpretation of the universe, when we did not have enough abstract layers of understanding. So either you're looking at it from a scientific worldview or a spiritual worldview, you can take something literally or you can take something symbolically or metaphorically. So that a literal thing would be to treat a spirit as if it was like a person, but a spirit wouldn't be a person. It would be that which is a lot more vast, and it wouldn't respond to you as a person would. It would just be energy. So I think scientifically we can either also treat things in a simple literal way, or we can learn to see the many layers that are interesting. And at one point I think they would meet, because what we're approaching now in the world is an embodiment where a lot of religious and psychological and philosophical understandings in the past, including, let's say, the traditional Chinese or Buddhist, what have you, there wasn't this embodiment there where if it's spirit, it's spirit, if it's body, it's body. But what if when you alter your spiritual experience, your cells themselves would like undergo transformations? Like I would rather go into that route where something is sustaining you in the world, encasing you, and allowing spirit to have a body. So the science bears some systematicity that allows us to handle the spiritual awakening. So it's still spiritual, it's still very energetic, but because we live in the world, we don't want to create separation anymore. So don't chuck anything out. Just allow them to have better conversations with each other, these poles. And when we listen to these things, like we're in an inner dance training where the context is very energy based, very contextual. When we're actually studying these together, or even you alone, you're already organizing your own mind. You're categorizing information so that there's growth. There's a kind of growth happening. A lot of the information that's being shared is very impersonal. It's not subjective. It belongs out there. You can check and balance it with your own research, but it actually gives you more of an understanding of what humanity knows, not just a specific culture or not. So the question is, what would that do to your energy if it starts to age with a more human understanding, right? And especially if you get to apply that, that's actually quite powerful. So plasticity, physical transformation would come after the emotional, the very personal subjective experience, you know, like when you grow. That's why trainings are really important. That's why information to people who are becoming like children, it feels good. Like for us, it feels good because we are informing like what is there, you know, billions of neurons, trillions of cells, gazillions of synaptic connections. Getting to speak to your whole system, it allows the nature in you to feel heard. You knew this complexity, but to make it just more explicit and clear, you're changing your brain even as you're studying it. It's super reflexive. It's like it's looking at a mirror, you know? You're muted.
So this brings up something that was at the back of my mind when you talked about the science, right? People who suffer from, or people who, you know, as we age, right, we generally get into a space where we forget. Because I mean, here we're talking about brain and how brain actually impacts memory, or how memory is stored, and all that, right? So people who are aging, and as we age, we get into a situation where we don't remember things, right? Whether you call it dementia, Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's, I think, is a medical condition. And in this, right, if we can, if as facilitators, or if, you know, in terms of this whole learning, right, we can actually shift the chemistry that the body is about, right? Is this an area? So can this, as in this, I don't know what to call it in the dance. I don't call it a modality, but can this whole space, right? Can this change things for people who are headed in that direction, or people who have the labeled conditions?
Okay, like this is really huge as well. And we'll discuss this more later on. Oh, no, you're not seeing my screen. Sorry. Okay, so we're talking about memory. I think let's piece the components of this in very metaphorical terms. So let's say you have let's say here you have a container. Let's say it's a cup. And so you have the container and then you have the liquid. So let's say you have it could be just call it container, and then inside is the substance. So when we talk about the memory, memory could be substance. But when you think about the container, because your question is about change. So let's say Alzheimer's, dementia, or amnesia, or aphasia as well can lead to certain types of memory loss. The question is, what is actually changing? So when we get attached to the substance, which could be in terms of memory, this could be the contents of the mind, right? These are like episodic memories, short-term memories. It could be like different types of memories. When we start to forget, there's almost this notion that the contents are not so much there anymore. It's like, where did they go? Should we bring it back? You know, is that something we do when people are already let go? There's something very interesting in the neurosciences. It's been a sharp debate for a long time, and it's about the concept is called neurogenesis. Now, for the longest time ever, even though the neurosciences were advancing, the idea was that like old people cannot grow new nerve cells or neurons. But it was only established maybe within the last 10 years through empirical data that this is not true. This is an illusion. Old people can very well create new neurons. And when they do, what this would say in cases of memory loss, you can't always go back to the same content. Some of the content would change. Now, that's one point of view, you know, okay, new synaptic connections, new neurons, especially that is happening in the hippocampus more than anywhere else. Like You're growing more new memory cells than let's say motor cells or emotion cells. Okay, if I wasn't to suggest we look at that, what would actually be more interesting that's relatable to inner dance is rather than change the substance, change the container. And when you think about that from consciousness, if you change the dimensions of the mind, the substance will also change radically. There's a famous line in media theory, the medium is the message. Okay, so think of this from the point of view of a paradigm. A paradigm is a dimension. It could be you're thinking from a 3D paradigm or a 4D paradigm. When you switch to like the 4D or 5D paradigm, what you're doing is you're switching dimensions. So rather than observing memory from a content perspective, when you change memory from a dimensional space, something weird and interesting will happen, even in dementia or Alzheimer's. And that is going to affect what's called time perception. So that in Alzheimer's or in dementia, past and the future will become less differentiated from each other. So people are living in, there's like a loop. There's like a loop where the future now becomes inclined with the past, and the past starts to creep into the future. So it would seem like adults are acting like babies and small children, but there's something more that's happening, and that's where spirituality needs to step in. That's when we start to get interested in what did the world look like to a baby, and to someone who is dying, what is the world going to look like in transition? I think that's where spirituality will need to step in a way that science is not going to have all the answers to. Beautiful. Okay, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think this session really connected so many dots for me, and I just wanna like extend my gratitude for you, Pai, and all of those who shared your stories and experiences. So I think what clicked for me was the idea of space holding. So many things. I'll just try to share my thoughts. So I think the idea of space holding, right? Like you talk about the dimension, like as a space holder, as a facilitator, as a witness, it's very important for us to assess and to reevaluate from what dimension, from what paradigm are we holding that space with. And even in the story with Trudy, Fiona, etc., whose amygdala is being activated, whose fear is being learned and being transcended. So we are all in dialogues with each other. Who's experiencing the inner dance? Is it the facilitator or is it the participant, right? Because we are all entering each other's paradigm in that sense as well. And the second thing that like just lit up a spark in me was when you said it's really not in the tool, it's not really in the modality, and the tool is really just a container or the body through which spirit, as you've defined, it's our belief systems, our paradigm, the way what we think about things is being contained. And that led me to think about in our last conversation through the Everton tutorial, and I asked you why music. And you said music as a container is dimension, it holds different dimensions as well. Yeah, in the same way that Trudy asked the question, am I here to let my belief systems go? Or am I here to take the science route, right? And I think it's really holding space for all to coexist without canceling each other out. Yeah, and that just clicked for me, like what that all is. There's no binary, there's no one over the other. It's just space or dimensionality to allow everything to just coexist and have conversations with each other. And that just lit up my brain for me. So yeah, just thank you for that. Yeah.
I want to add something that would bring another layer of interest, like in the conversation. These are things that might not come up naturally, but especially if you start doing work with psychiatric or even in jails or addiction, there's so many layers that are so important. So a facilitator needs to not be in his or her ego, right? You can't be thinking when you're holding the space. You have to become the space that holds the space. So when that happens, you become the society. Let's say you become the external locus. You're just channeling. But this could be a problem when you try to make it your main intention to perform an ego death. Okay, you use, let's say, spiritual terms, let's say the death of the ego. Ego isn't just like a prefrontal cortex thing in the brain. There's a whole bunch of circuitries and loops it's connected to. When you study the default mode network, the PFC is connected to, let's say, the precuneus. We'll study a lot of these later on. And the cingulate cortex, especially the posterior cingulate cortex. I hope you don't mind that we go into a learning of neuroscience here. Just can call it the PCC. Now, the precuneus is very interesting as it relates to when children learn to read and even write. It allows for metaphorical thinking, and it allows for imagination to come out. Now, the PCC is interesting in the sense that empathy becomes possible. Now, the first stage of empathy in a child is called the TOM. We have a facilitator in the UK named Tom. We're not talking about Tom. We're talking about the theory of mind. Now, for those who have kids or are exposed to children, children don't really have a theory of mind so much. The theory of mind is the ability to see the world through someone else's eyes. Okay, meaning for a child, the child is very in the beginning like egocentric. The child goes through an egocentric stage, especially at the age of 2 or 3. The whole universe revolves around that child. Now, stages of growth would then bring that child into the understanding that there's a society that exists outside of me. So I need to also understand how my mom or dad perceives the world. The child starts to develop an empathy. Now, what we need to be careful about is when we start to activate dopamine all over the place, it's actually possible to shut down the posterior cingulate cortex and precuneus process when an ego death happens. And what you would take away along with that would be a sense of moral truths. So let's say you're holding a room for criminals or former criminals, and you want to liberate them from judgment. And if you do prefrontal cortex deactivations enough, you would actually just say you would cancel out precuneus and PCC activations in a way that I just don't care. I don't care about society. I don't care about the rules. I don't care about norms. And that would cancel out levels of empathy where I don't care about how other people are thinking. So the energy work is very, very good at shutting down a lot of these mental functions. A lot of the techniques that can bring about the balance would be verbal. It would be helping people to go back into words, thoughts, and then it's actually really important that they start to be responsible citizens as well. Often a lot of the work actually just pushes people to just go wild, free yourself, like be liberated. But maturity, stages of development will become relevant when you're, after a few months already, or if you're instituting this inside programs. So I think
Sorry,
this is, yeah.
Can I just ask another question? So this is more towards technique in terms of musicality. So I know you mentioned also about one of the ways you could effect change using music is to bring about use a trigger mechanism to arouse a memory that has a sort of fear attached to it, and then rerouting that fear by changing the song or the transition. So the music, the magic is in the transition. So I'm thinking in terms of when you're doing which is why we live DJ, right? Because you can read the room and we can switch accordingly as well. I'm just thinking, is the transition supposed to be sequential, or because you talked also about co-activating
the sympathetic and parasympathetic?
Yes, exactly. So how would that translate if it's not sequential? Yeah.
The not sequential would be called simultaneous. So the low and the high would be happening with each other. Now, we're at this point where we need to acknowledge the power, the what do you call it? The sequential means one at a time, like low, fast, like darkness, light, fear, courage. We don't want to
Duality,
discredit
yeah.
that, but you don't want to keep doing that. Otherwise, people would go into a loop, especially in a place like Singapore. They would really just keep going back in order to activate the same trauma. They'd be re-traumatizing themselves. So what you want to do is expose them to certain styles and then shift, and then go back and then shift. You might think, okay, emotional, non-emotional, non-emotional, emotional, cosmic, personal, planetary, like, just mix it up so that you can help people. You don't want to cancel out the person. The person's important, but it can't always just be about the person because they'll get stuck in their story. You want them to access the planet. So have a sequence still where part of the sequence would be non-sequential. Can't be more interestingly paradoxical, right?
So it can be personal and cosmic at the same time. That's what you're referring to, right? It's not one after another.
No,
Like the
meaning
layers. Okay.
well, when it comes to the simultaneous, that's everything happening all at once. But you can also have that in a sequence where you're not always doing that. What you need to learn is a repertoire, or you need to increase the tools in your toolbox so you're not always just using the same songs in a sequence. You have different storylines that either will be super ancient or super alien. You want to make all that possible for people. But if it's really just always going back to my 7-year-old self getting bullied in school, that could get really old after a couple of months.
Okay. Sorry, so it's not in a single session. What you're referring to is using a different sequence in okay, got it. I understand.
Yeah. Have a lot of tools.
Okay.
And we'll be studying those in the next months. All right. Okay. Viri.
So I'm trying to play my question. I'm trying to put my question in words in my head, but I can't. So I'm just gonna talk and see what it goes. So I feel like this question is an existential question because we are talking about scientific ways, and I'm trying to understand with these all of these scientific way to understand what I am and who I am, right? So without taking out the belief systems that we are in the whole world with Catholicism, Christianism, like voodoo, witchcraft, and all the stuff, that we tend to put bad and good, we tend to put like a conception, a duality in this, but saying that the energy is neutral, you were talking about in the case of Trudy, instead of like fighting that is something bad is happening or something, you say something. What if we start talking with the energy, right? So I guess my question about like a belief system, and is like how can I put it, like you were in this situation that you were in a moment of your life, you were everything, right? So I want to know what is your, well, I'm curious about to know what is your belief system about the energy, spiritually talking, and if we can talk with the energy instead of fighting the energy, if we can talk, does that mean that in that situation, different dimensions were colliding without putting the bad and the good term on the just neutral? That means that dimensions were colliding and everything was happening at the same time. So yeah, I
Okay.
think that's my
Yeah.
question.
There needs to be a systematicity so that when people move from the awareness that they're one, because that dimension exists, right? We believe that dimension exists. How do we then create the growth process coming from the point? So let's say people enter oneness and they're like a dot, like a universe dot. There needs to be growth So when they start to extend from that dot, something would happen. So there needs to be systematicity. The mandala could help. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We took this up in Maya, so that if there's a belief that I am one, they will extend from that in different directionalities. The key of 7 could help because that performs a systematicity that belongs to nature. The number 7 is there. So one thing you could share that belongs to the inner intensive construct, and we designed this in the long term for us to be able to look at it, is these are statements like less is more. This is the number 1 is the red chakra. The opposite of that would be like I'm poor, there's not enough. So the statement here is basically everything we need is already within us. And when spirit hears that, whatever paradigm that's holding that I'm poor, I'm not enough, I'm lacking, it will transform in just that one dimension. Let's say in the orange, this is really our interpretations that belong to the intensive. There are different chakra systems or systems of 7 that are. So it depends on what you're going to speak. Oh, why did it do that? It's so interesting. That's really cool. Like this one's the most important. Resonance is irreducible. Like a lot of people have been talking about like transmission, where the energy would come from God, the Father, the Guru, the Master, or the teacher. Like if you're able to speak, you're complete. You don't actually need anything. I can't add or minus anything from you. You're already whole. You are a holographic principle of the universe. This is really just an example of how you might organize what is a belief structure, right? What do I know? What do I believe in? So I think the key of 7 could be a starting point, so that let's say whether you're listening to the words or people's body language, what are they dealing with? Are they dealing with lack of love, support, belongingness? Do they have a blue chakra issue? Do they have a hard time communicating? Are they like vomiting stuff out, needing to shout something? Are they, where are they recessive that's weak? Are they dealing with power issues, issues with related to love, issues related to emotion, freedom, stuckness, poverty? Then you would treat every single color as a whole. It's still oneness, right? It's still all at once, but you can see their story is still stuck with a particular color. So energetically, you can speak to that, but also because we are studying the endocrine system, and each endocrine gland can relate to a specific color that's related to a psychology, which is a belief structure. Then you can speak both to the body and the mind together, right? Without just making stuff up as you go along. You can actually recognize, even in some cultures, there are more dominant blockages that are common to the group. So you can design some of your processes to, are people not trusting because they're very individual. They're very, I don't trust you. I'm great. I don't want to lay down. I have nothing to work on. I don't really have any problems. How do you learn to read the room always? So that even if they go empty, you can still know the traces of what is there. There's always residues that are always there. It's actually when you need to enact it. When you put a sound, when you touch bodies, it's the dynamism, the movement from one music or situation to another. You will feel the invisible. You will hear what is not being spoken out loud, but actually is being spoken through emotions. But if you don't trust, you're not going to get to that. You need to act it out. You need to just dive in there and just do it somehow.
So when you say to when you say to speak to the energy, you are saying like that speak to the energy that is reflecting, no not per se the energy that is like let's say that it's another being there, like another intelligent being there.
Yeah, the intelligence or the being is always in the Vesica Pisces. Like you're this is you, and then any being you meet, this is them. So when you and them become one, uh, it would always like be this middle space. You will always create this middle space. So it's like this is you. You're not so you anymore, and this is the other being. That other being isn't. You actually need to become each other in that space where what's happening to them is also happening to you, and vice versa. You have to be really careful whatever you hold because they will become that, and whatever they're holding, you're going to become that. So if you don't know how to create a proper boundary, that's going to be hard. But at the same time, when you're too bound up, that's also going to be hard. You need a healthy balance between encasing or containing yourself enough that you're also held. You can't just let go, but you also cannot be too protective. You need to be open, but you need to be very contained, very, very held somehow. That can't just be energy. That needs your wisdom. That needs your insight. Okay, amazing. Thank you very.
Thank you.
Julia, was your question answered already through Justin's? I think that's what you wrote in the chat, or do you still have something?
Sorry.
Sí, perdón. Janine?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Who was speaking then? Was it Jeremy or Jeremy? Yeah, go ahead, Julia.
Gracias, Pai. Ok, hemos tenido un hermoso encuentro con mucho que integrar. Hemos hablado, ¿cierto?, de cómo la música la música apoya, ¿cierto?, al cerebro para lograr ciertos estados, para que la persona pueda ser, en términos, digamos, simples. Hay mucho más, pero eso es. Ahora, hemos hablado de cierto tipo de enfermedades dentro de la llamada, Alzheimer, qué sé yo, de enfermedades que de alguna manera alteran el cerebro. Pero, Pai, ¿qué pasa con la patogenia de base? Y de patogenia hablo acerca de virus, hongos, bacterias, parásitos que pueden alojarse en, en cualquier parte del cuerpo, pero veamos, en el cerebro. Bien, porque la patogenia altera también la química del cerebro. No sé si estoy adelantándome mucho, pero me nace hacer esa pregunta ahora. ¿Qué pasa con el cuerpo, todo nuestro sistema endocrino, todo el funcionamiento del cerebro, mezclando o incluyendo esta otra contexto?
Okay. Yeah, I get you. Let me do a very quick one. It could belong to our outline, but this is far ahead, but it would be good to just say a few words. So when we would study the autonomic, no, this is that, yeah. When we study the autonomic nervous system in at length, autonomic nervous system at length, we would study many systems there. These are the unconscious intelligences of the body. So the question that you're raising would be most relatable to that which is metabolic metabolism, which would still be connected to healing. More connected to healing would usually be immunity, like becoming strong, and that would be relatable to pathogens. But I feel within the inner dance construct, the more powerful element would be metabolism. Now, metabolism would either be anabolic, which is to build up new proteins, new cells, or it could be catabolic, which is to break down like old unwanted fats or information that are being held in the body. So when we go into the inner dance, we break down and then we build up. So something the autonomic nervous system does is it handles metabolism. So especially when you activate the hypothalamus, this is something we need to study because not only does the hypothalamus affect the autonomic nervous system, it also affects the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is going to be much more influential on metabolism than just the autonomic nervous system. So then we're not just talking about neurotransmitters or hormones. We're also talking about the life force of the body are the enzymes. It's what allows for like food or old stuff to die, to be reborn later on as new cells. And when we don't have life force, our enzyme levels go down. That's usually either eating bad food, getting stressed out. But what I have learned in the long term is when people are in fear states, metabolism would get affected. So I think just starting with bringing people into these deep states of trust and energy and healing, we are taking care of metabolism, which is, I think, the deepest intelligence of the body. It talks about homeostasis, regulation, like balance, you know? Sometimes a lot of people are not interested in balance because they don't like the old balance. The old balance is hiding fear. They're too stabilized in fear. So what we're seeing in many spiritual circles is people want to be imbalanced so that they can find a new balance. We have to have empathy for those who are there. We sometimes will judge them. That's too much, man. That's really weird. That's too wild. But sometimes when people are too, let's say in Catholic countries, like when you describe Chile, there's a lot of conservatism and there's a lot of fear. So for people to break out of the old system, sometimes they need to go through major upheaval in terms of belief, especially. Um, okay, let's close with Jeremy as we started with Jeremy, and then we can say
Yeah,
this is a good
just
call.
one question. So, you know how you mapped out the mind, emotions, body through the neocortex, limbic structures, and the autonomic nervous system. So the other day, I actually had a breath work session, and I realized that through the breath, which is actually activating through the body, and therefore the heart rate variability, I was actually able to enter the inner dance state, right? So, am I right to say that like you said that the mind, body, and emotions are not separate, and you can have access into the other systems through one system alone. So through breath work, am I right to say that I was able to enter the inner dance state as well because I tapped into the body?
Mm.
So I'm trying to understand the correlation. Yeah.
The thing with breath work, including yoga, that could lead into something like inner dance is you're not even just tapping into the autonomic nervous system. You're tapping into the somatic nervous system because you're controlling your breath. And then at the point of letting go, you go into the autonomic nervous system. So that's actually pretty cool too. Say you go to the gym, you exercise really hard, and then suddenly you drop. Then you put the music on. You actually will go into a tremendously deep state because the fact that you activated the fear confrontation element, like your heart rate is up. In breath work, you activate like a lot of fear, anxiety levels in a conscious way. You know, it's the masculine and then you move into the
The
feminine.
feminine.
So I think this could be just interesting things for people to talk about because people are doing a lot of extreme stuff in society. If they bring in the feminine alongside some of those, there could be new modalities that we've never seen that would lead to like, you know, confrontation, observation, meeting point. You know what that would do to people? They wouldn't be so afraid anymore. They wouldn't be escaping conflict. They wouldn't be always stressed out. It would open people up so that, okay, I used to get triggered by that. That used to scare me. Like my mom, she used to trigger me. Now I can sit with my mom and Okay, my ventral medial prefrontal cortex is now modulating that you're not actually scary, mom. I can talk to you, your
So
boss.
on that point, I think you brought up a very good point. So I'm starting to work with people on a one-on-one level, and I realized that, you talk about the masculine and feminine polarity. Like masculine, I would assume people who are more in the fight or flight, in the sympathetic, and feminine people who are a little bit more weighed down, heavy, in the frozen state of the parasympathetic as well. So I'm assuming that in order for me to, in a way, help them to have conversations between both ends, or to draw the connection from the missing polarity, is to introduce the other side of the spectrum. So for somebody who might feel a little bit depressed and down, like maybe a little bit more activation and heavy ear beats, like to increase the heart rate variability, might be helpful for them. Like, is that how I could think about
Yeah,
it as
yeah,
well?
yeah. Even
Okay.
just the classic inner dance style is really good for depression, because most of depression is actually a deactivation of dopaminergic projections that's not hitting the amygdala, not hitting the prefrontal cortex. So with depression comes like a mind fog. So general inner dance will work in most depression cases because we're activating dopamine. We're just careful with it because that prolonged too much for too long, that then would lead to ego inflation or levels of addiction and high stress levels as well. Too much adrenaline, too much cortisol in the blood will lead to sleep deprivation, lack of REM state sleep, and the lack of metabolism. So it would be interesting to teach people like just how much. Is it too much? Then rest. And then, okay, let's go again. Okay, cool. Let's call this a call because it's 12:12 here. That's a good timing. Thank you so much. This is just the first one. I hope you feel good about this type of meeting because we're going more concrete. We're not going into gray areas anymore. We're really just diving deep, and these conversations are actually very extendable. We can talk for hours and hours and not stop. There's always more to explore. It's just that I think even this call would take you some time to process. Feel free to watch it again. If you want to join the call tomorrow, it's up to you. You can watch the recording if it's really going to be late in your region. But right now, I hope this helps you to generate questions, really good questions. Let's ask the real questions, the good questions more and more. We can do that within our insular groups. Everyone belongs to their own local group. So if you want to just keep on discussing these with your community, it would be really good to see this from a local. Okay, so gracias. Thank you. Salamat. If you can unmute, have to
Thank
close.
you.
Gracias, Pai.
Amazing.
Abrazos a todos.
Gracias.
Gracias,
Thank you.
gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.